Hello, everyone. We're back with the Hill of Roses. Thank you all for those that tuned into yesterday's live stream where we really kicked off what we're going to be doing collectively as a channel going forward. I wanted to take today's episode to go through a very important topic. A lot of people are going to be talking about the presidential election. We're going to be doing a little bit different here on this channel. As you saw yesterday, we're going to be focusing on congressional races as well as advocating for specific policies. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't do, some coverage of what we should be doing in general for the presidential election. I think there are a lot of differing views of how we handle this conundrum of, a lesser of two evils. As you see, Donald Trump as well as Joe Biden here, we got screwed again. But what do? There's four main approaches that, have traditionally been talked about in terms of Democrats and progressives in general of how to handle this question. There are, vote blue no matter who. This is more of your traditional Democrat, very loyalist to the party. You have your vote blue because of Trump, people who see Trump as a unique and existential threat. You have people who are doing a more state-by-state strategic voting strategy where, because of the Electoral College, only some of it matters. So they are more willing to do it in certain states, voting for Biden, and in other states, they're voting on principle. And finally, you have the Never Biden movement. And so I wanted to kind of dissect my thoughts on each of these, different approaches, as well as where I fall myself. So first and foremost, let's start with vote blue no matter who. In general, I would say Democrats are better than Republicans. I think it's a fair statement, but here's the problem. Just because you're better than Republicans, which are basically, in large cases, the people who actually run for office, are complete corporate sellouts who don't give a crap about the value of life, despite what they say being pro-life, and the destruction of the environment and the removal of civil rights. It's very clear that the idea of vote blue no matter who really damages our power as progressives. It's a way to have a cudgel that wields, the traditional, centrist who might be considering between the Republicans as well as the Democrats. They start to cater to those folks instead, those, they call themselves moderates, but I would consider them more extremist in their approach. If you see that the same thing is happening in the Republicans as Democrats, and you're like, which is better? I think that's incredibly foolish. And so we basically give up our entire leverage with a vote blue no matter who type of strategy. And so what we need to consider as progressives is, yes, we have to acknowledge the reality that these candidates are better on the Democratic side in general, even if in the case of Joe Biden, the margins become significantly less. But we need to consider power, because at the end of the day, we're trying to advocate to getting a completely different agenda than the Democratic Party is currently. We advocate for a more universal approach. We advocate putting more power into people's hands directly. We do things like Medicare for all, for UBI, these bold progressive ideas, ending wars. And a lot of this is out of whack with what the current Democratic leadership is trying to achieve. So vote blue no matter who automatically gives up that leverage straight out the door. It makes it so that we are kind of burdened in the sense of we have no leverage later on if we have to capitulate at the start saying we'll support you no matter what you put on our table. You can't just say I'm going to commit to the lesser of two evils and say that the Democrat is always the lesser of two evils. We need to have some system that, elevates the discussion beyond a two-party system. We've been warned about this as a problem since our nation's birth, and our founding fathers warned about the two-party system. And so we can't just give up that leverage. We have to make them know that we have the exit that we need to continue building out in the Green Party or the Libertarian Party, and that we need to say, we're not going to come to you unless you come to us first. You have to meet us at least partway to the middle. And so in this election, or any election, I will never be a vote blue no matter who. You have to look at it at the individual levels and each individual race. So when it comes to vote blue no matter who, never. We are never doing that. The second is the vote blue because in this case, we have Donald Trump. And now this is understandable. Donald Trump is kind of an existential threat to our way of life, but he wasn't the only existential threat to our way of life. This has been a continual trend for now nearly 50 years, since like the 70s, we've been seeing this rapid growth in economic inequality. We've known about these problems in our environment in terms of climate change, even back until the 1910s, even potentially before that, but it's been studied and known as a fact since the 1910s. We've seen, immigration policy further exacerbated from the Obama administration that started the kids in cages, but now families are being torn apart. We're seeing our alliances around the world start to be delegitimized, and we're embracing a lot more of these more dictatorial rulers. There's a lot to be disliked about Donald Trump. I think the biggest one is clearly the economy in terms of how further exacerbated things have been, from the tax cuts to some of the, reductions in terms of funding for the ACA, in terms of, how we started to have increased housing payments for home buyers, for reversing some of the stuff from the FHA. There's so many things we can go through on the economy, whether it becomes, reductions of, our ability to unionize from the enforcement of right to work laws, repealing the fair pay and safe workplaces executive orders. There's just so many things under the sun that Donald Trump has done wrong. But here's the problem. The problem is that when it comes to Joe Biden, it's not a significantly better alternative. Like, we have this option now where it's essentially, someone who has advocated for Social Security cuts for 40 years, someone who has supported cutting Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and raising the retirement ages. He has had a healthcare plan, which is basically a public option, but not like a Tulsi version or a Yang version, which is, free at the point of service, except for maybe a small copay. This has like the full typical insurance plan. It's the existing Medicare plan. And so that's a really big problem when he's leaving tens of millions of people uninsured still. He has problems with the environment. He's still pro-fracking. He believes that we need to be continuing to export oil and gas. And, he's continuing to support the build out of fossil fuel infrastructure. You have to remember that Dakota Access Pipeline started under the Obama administration. This is a big problem. You can take examples of him making it harder to default on student loan debt and declare bankruptcy. That was something that he famously made essentially impossible. He has taken donations from lobbyists, fossil fuel industry executives, as well as the healthcare industry. We have to understand that Joe Biden is really beholden to a lot of this billionaire donor class. He had 44 of them during his primary election. And that furthermore, even when he was looking to who to put into a cabinet, one of the names he's floated is like Jamie Dimon. So we're going to be having Wall Street continue to be kind of part of our ecosystem of the cabinet. He's famously the person who wrote the 1994 crime bill. And yes, there were some key parts in it that were sweeteners that made some, fellow progressives vote for it as well. Like, this is a big problem in terms of legislation in general, is how we try to put sweeteners into toxic bills. We saw that with the coronavirus package when we essentially gave $4.5 trillion away so that we can get some immediate cash out to people in general. Biden in his record has said how he's, supported, some segregationists in terms of the, integration of busing. He has repeatedly lied in terms of his involvement in civil rights movements, back in our own country, as well as, in apartheid South Africa. He was the person who voted for the Telecommunications Act in 1996, which deregulated our media infrastructure. He voted for the Iraq War. He voted for the Patriot Act. He has, voted against expanding the child tax credit. There's just so many different things on his record that are abominable. Now, here's the thing. Do I think Biden is better than Trump? I do still. Like, he is highly flawed, but I think he is still better than Trump. And I think this is in large part due to the fact that we simply need to accept that there are some things we're still going to get from having a Biden presidency. And I think those things in general are really, first and foremost, the courts. I think that's a big one that we all need to consider. I think it really, is important that we get someone who can replace RBG. I think that is a big deal. I think we need someone who's going to actually, take This isn't as much of a step as we need, but getting back into the Paris Climate Accords is a big deal. I think it's very important that we have someone who does support, raising wages, someone who supports expanding healthcare rather than cutting into the ACA. There are a variety of issues where we can say objectively Joe Biden is better. Now, likewise, there are some issues that we can say that Trump is better. We can acknowledge the fact that in terms of foreign policy, we have a better relationship in terms of how we need to be addressing China because of Trump. We can address how we have a better relationship with handling North Korea because of Trump. There are these relationships of more anti-interventionist policies that Trump has kind of had on the foreign scale that are a little bit better than what the Obama administration has done. Now, is his foreign policy perfect? No, I alluded to that earlier. He's really frayed a lot of our alliances, and he's continuing to be a bomber in chief. So I think that is one aspect. The second is you could also argue that he is better on criminal justice reform, as you've seen from his willingness to, allow certain individuals who had committed low-level drug offenses to be free. I think that's something that we need to acknowledge what he did in terms of those pardons, as well as, under his administration, they passed, the First Step Act. Obviously, it's just a first step. A lot more needs to be done. But I think that is still something we can give him credit when we're comparing it to Biden writing the 1994 crime bill. So with that being said, should we be voting blue because of Trump? I think certain people should be. I think that's something that obviously only you can decide for yourself in terms of these two individuals' records, but I think it's something to consider. So after that, I think the next solution that we have to consider, which is kind of more where I fall, a state-by-state strategic voting strategy. I recognize that these two individuals are kind of beyond the pale. But the fact of the matter is, one of them is going to end up being the president. And that's just the fact of the matter. So you have to accept which would you prefer. And at the end of the day, I have a minor preference for Joe Biden. But the fact of the matter is, I live in a state, New Jersey, where my vote largely doesn't matter. It's going to be a state that goes blue regardless. And, frankly, that's the case for many states around this country. It's a safe blue or it's a safe red. Approximately 33 states out of the 50 are completely we already know where it's going. It doesn't matter who the candidates were. It was going to be blue or red, and we knew who it was going to be. And so that leaves 17 states. 17, close to swing states or actual swing states currently. And in those states, those 17 states, I do recommend actually voting for Joe Biden in that case, because we do have to accept that one of these two is going to be the president. And I think we can recognize that we can get some minor gains out of Joe Biden, and he's shown a little bit more willingness to work with progressive leaders on some of their issues. Does he go as far as we like? No. But this is a problem when we say we're going to just punt away the court for decades or try to, make people suffer enough to coming to the realization that they need progressive. I do think that's a foolish approach and that there's going to be needless harm by going down that road. But we have to also exercise some form of leverage. We need to be building our lifeboats so that, we do have an alternative here that is set up for future elections to, compete on a larger level. And so that's why I believe in these 33 states, if you consider yourself a progressive individual, you should seriously consider voting for a third party option. And in my view, now that Vermin Supreme has largely been rejected from becoming the Libertarian nominee, I think we got to just all rally around the Green Party. And, I hope it's going to be Dario Hunter as the candidate. I don't think at this point it's going to be Dario Hunter, but I think it's largely going to be beneficial either way to have either of these candidates, and they are far better than what Joe Biden is or Donald Trump. And so I think if we can get them across that 5% threshold on a national level, where they can get some, funding from the FEC, I believe it's around $10 million for the next election, I think that will help them compete. And it'll send a clear signal that we mean business, and that, beyond this election, we can start to say that we want to organize around the Green Party in general on down ballot races. Now, as you probably saw in yesterday's video, I wanted to focus just on Democratic candidates in 2020 in terms of Congress, because I do think that, when you're in a presidential election year, largely it's going to be swayed from the top of the ticket. You're going to have more people just voting down ballot, and so that they're going to be focusing on more Democratic candidates. So while that's the mindset, we should be strategic and support good Democratic candidates. But going forward, I think we need to give a hard look at people who are willing to run as independents as well as Green Party members. So in my mind, that's what I'm going to be doing in 2022. The other strategy you can have is, not necessarily building a formal party, but building a voter coalition that kind of has a primary before the primary, so that we're unified in who we want to run against and who we want to run for, so that we know we are solidified rather than fragmented as a movement. And I think by having our own primary, by having the people come together and draft a platform, and having whoever wins the primary have to run on that platform, would do us a lot of good to have some leverage within the party. But we also need to explore having alternative parties, because, the fact of the matter is the party system is a private institution. It has the ability to do whatever we would like. It can rig however we would like. And it's been tried in court, even during that 2016 election, when there was very clear evidence of putting a thumb on the scale. The court said they're allowed to do it. They're a private institution. And, as sad as it is, the Democratic Party is not democratic right now. We would love to reform that, and that's why we have some of the policy initiatives that we do, and hopefully we support candidates who are Democrats that will help enable them. That's what we're trying to do from the inside. But we need to start outside organizing to have a collective voice that says, we know what we want. If you want to come to our policy issues, we will support you. And I think that's really the next step. And that's what we're trying to do here on the Hill of Roses, is be able to have a clear policy vision and then work incrementally to get to that goal, and try and, solidify not just a left or right dynamic, but just a forward-looking view. And now I kind of want to switch into the last mindset here before I, react with some of the comments that have been left here so far. The last is the never Biden movement. I think that this is a little bit of a foolish approach. I completely understand it. I don't like Joe Biden. I'm not going to mince words on that. I don't like him. But, Trump is clearly worse. You have to recognize that. You have to be at least honest with this conversation if you want to be having a never Biden movement. And I've largely not seen that. They basically draw a false equivalency that they're the same because they're both racist, they're both senile, they're both, xenophobic, they both have, some dementia issues potentially. And I think that is not an honest conversation to be had. I think we have to recognize that there is more competency that would be brought by a Biden administration as a whole, because with that, you're not just getting Biden, you're getting everyone that's around him. And he does have certain policy areas, as we laid out, that are formally better. So I think first, you have to have an honest conversation around the subject. But furthermore, it shows a mindset of unwillingness to work and adapt and form a coalition. A lot of these people who, are moderates actually liked a lot of the policies that Bernie was supporting. And when you show a movement that is not willing to have some flexibility in terms of who we're supporting and work together as a coalition, they're going to feel like their voices are not going to be respected when they want to join. So you're basically either having a hard line and kind of capping your growth potential as a movement, because you have to say you're either with us or against us in terms of these policy visions, or you have to, come to this understanding of, if you're going to just attack people for supporting Biden when they feel like they're in this dichotomy of an election, you're kind of attacking people just in general that feel like they don't have choices anyway. They're not satisfied. They don't endorse Biden for the sake of who Biden is. They're just voting against Trump. And you have to just have some empathy for that when people are in general kind of scared. Not everyone can afford just strategically voting for, the future and potentially developing a third party. Most people are just trying to live their day-to-day lives, and they're kind of tired of just Trump in general. And so by attacking people, rarely you actually get them to want to work with you or want to interact with you in general and be exposed to more of your ideas to adopt and see how this fundamental system is kind of rigged against them. So I think attacking these people is largely a mistake. And by having a Never Biden movement, what angle is there for Joe Biden to ever want to adopt your policies or work with you on your policies? He knows you're not the coalition he needs to go after. I think this is largely reflected in why so many of these candidates that were staunchly populist, were progressive leaning, like Bernie Sanders, like Andrew Yang, like Tulsi Gabbard, all came along and endorsed Joe Biden because he's the presumptive nominee, because they realized that Trump is still a large problem we need to handle, and that Biden just wants to get elected. He's going to do whatever it is for power. He's not here to enact an agenda. He just wants to be a transitionary figure. And so if he thinks that these things can help him get elected, he's more willing to do it. And it's why he's showing, you need to see some results from these task force, but it's why he's showing, unlike Hillary, a much stronger willingness to work with progressive leadership. It's why he's floated out the name of Elizabeth Warren potentially as his VP, as, we may have disagreements on her in general, but, in most people's perception, Elizabeth Warren is a progressive. We can go all day on some of the factors of her policies and whether it lines up with, the other three candidates I mentioned, but he's signaling that he wants to work with these progressive leaders. And I think, he is not going to do most of the governing himself. It's largely going to be, who does he put in that cabinet? And if we can show that we have a voter coalition that is willing to vote for him if he moves on certain issues or he appoints certain people, I think that can go a long way to having some leverage to affect the change for the next 4 years. Because frankly, he is not going to be running probably in 2024. He signaled that a couple of times to his private donor meetings. And so I think it's really important that we find a way to put ourselves into an inroad that says we're going to mitigate damage in 2024, use it as a transitionary period to stop going from reverse to neutral, and then we can go from drive 2024 onward, as well as in the 2022 and 2020 elections in terms of Congress. I think that's really the path we need to look forward to. And so my approach personally, and you can feel free to do whatever you'd like in your approach, one of the things that I think is really important is that we not judge voters on what they do. I have my own opinion, that you are entitled to your own. And I want to make that very clear. I believe a state-by-state strategic voting strategy is necessary, as well as putting clear demands on how he can win those votes in those states as well. You're not saying up front, I'm going to vote for you regardless, but you have to say, I am willing to vote for you. You have to just come to me on certain issues here or certain representation. And so with that being said, I want to thank you all for watching, and I want to go through some of the comments to see what you guys think in terms of this election cycle. Okay, so the first one, E pluribus unum, vote green no matter spleen. Yeah, I mean, that's the rhyme, but I think voting green no matter what can largely have some damaging effects in some of these swing states. And as I said beforehand, I really do think we need to still consider damage control. We're not going to get everything we want right away, but I think it's really important that we stop some of these damages that are occurring, especially around our judiciary as well as the environment. So I largely think green is the right way if you're going to do an alternative vote, but I think in swing states, you need to be a little bit more strategic. Okay, let's see. Next comment. Pat Buchanan's Republicans gang rise up. I don't know what this specific gang is, but I think anyone who considers themselves progressive and was supporting one of these candidates beforehand really needs to take a look and say, why do you actually support Trump? Is it just because you think the Democrats are corrupt to their core, and some of their leaders are, or is it an issues-based thing? And I think largely once you start to look at it on an issues-based level, like I try to do, you'll see that Republicans just don't have our best interests at heart. Some of maybe you disagree with Democrats on social issues, but I think largely social issues are dictated by culture in general, not through electoral politics. So I don't think that's really where we need to be focusing on. Okay, so let's look for another comment here. Okay. I worked in the renewable industry during the Obama, Biden, Blair years, and the industry was thriving. All those changes have been rolled back by the right, like my business, which went bust. It's exactly true. And I think we have to realize that, We may want more of a command style approach to how we address, the environment. We may want to have something more in the lines of a Green New Deal, having federal green jobs programs. But we have to also recognize that yes, some private solutions were starting to go towards that cause of, a more renewable economy in terms of how they are generating their energy. And so I think you're absolutely right that we need to take some good and start to mitigate the damage when we have such a limited time span to be able to enact the change that we want on terms of climate change. So yes, Trev, I totally agree with you. That's still at least a good progress. Okay, so let's see, next one. Biden's record is based on a different time. Bernie has pulled the narrative left. I think that's kind of true. I do agree that there is some legitimacy in saying he's from another era, but I also think that it's not like everything is just from another era. Like a lot of this was also the stuff that was being done during the Obama administration in terms of foreign policy, our kind of police state, our surveillance state. We can look towards how we were actually still developing pipelines into the oil industry. Obama praised how, we had done finally, self-sustaining ourselves on an oil economy to the point where we could actually export oil. He had basically bragged in meetings about how he helped Wall Street make record gains in terms of profits. And under his administration, wealth inequality grew by 1%. So I think that's a big, big thing that we need to consider, like especially when it comes to the Recovery Act. When you look at like how we tried to approach this economy's kind of financial crisis compared to the past ones, we didn't get any form of direct stimulus check to the working class. We gave a bailout to Wall Street, and no one was held criminally accountable for how they manipulated the market. So, I reject that it's just completely a different time, but I do think some of the criticisms, especially around, identity-based issues, segregation in terms of, he used to be not for gay marriage, but then he came for gay marriage. Biden is a political animal in the sense that he follows the waves. He just is in this for Biden. He wants to make sure that he can be elected and keep his legacy alive. And so he's just an adaptable individual with, most of that power that's kind of coming in his ear that helps him get elected being from corporate America. So if he wants to stay in power, he's still trying to appease that group as well. Okay, so now let's see. Next topic. Yeah, and here's the last one. This is the saddest part of it all. They keep going with this general approach of, putting the safe Democrat as who we need to choose from. And I think that is a big problem in terms of what they consider electable. And we've seen this in these exact losses, as E. Pluribus Unum calls out, that Hillary, Kerry, Gore, Dukakis, and Mondale all lost. Yeah, they'll always point to McGovern, but they never talk about these candidates. And I think it's absolutely right. We don't want to have someone who's, bending to whatever they need to do in terms of triangulation. We want to have someone who has a principled stand that they believe in, someone who is first and foremost, their stakeholders are the people, not corporations. We want to make sure that they kind of see how unrepresented we feel. We are at an approval rating for Congress right now of 22%. We have our institutions like the media falling down in trust ratings to 45%. We're at a fundamental period of time where we don't trust the status quo. We don't trust these big institutions to have our best wishes at heart, because we've seen this 50-year trend of economic inequality growing. We've seen, for the first time in a long time, our lifespans are now declining. It's now been 4 years straight where we've seen this decline. The way of life of the American economy is being, measured incorrectly, and it needs to be focused more on making sure that every single person is taken care of, because when we have every single person taken care of, they become more productive for that. And that makes our economy generate more value over time, because we simply have people who know that they're doing what they love because they're not, trapped into jobs just for healthcare benefits, or trapped into jobs because no other job has higher wages because we've kept the wage floor low because we don't have collective bargaining power. We need to take an approach that puts us first and, takes away some of that essentially, wage slavery away so that we have more freedom to decide what is productive uses of our time in this economy. So I do agree with you. These quote unquote safe candidates are nothing but safe. They are very risky candidates. And I would say that a lot of these, people who deem themselves centrists tend to be actually a little bit more extremist. And I do think it's important that we, as more progressive leaning individuals, start to frame ourselves more in a moderate angle of messaging, that these are common sense practices, not because, this is the moral thing to do necessarily, but they are moral things to do, but because it's the economically right thing to do. It's the efficient thing to do. That there becomes more trust from the people, that there becomes more productivity on a whole. So I think that's really important in terms of what is safe, because I think a lot of voters kind of smell bullshit now. Like, obviously, it doesn't completely work in the primary. It doesn't help that we have a media system that is still biasing a lot of people. But I think that they kind of have this sniff test of who is representing status quo that has already been hurting us and who is fighting for, change. Like, they need stuff presented in a very simplified manner, because not everyone wants to be, a policy buff. But they want to understand that you have certain key goals, even if the way you execute and get there may differ from person to person. You need to have simple explanations for how you're going to be changing people's lives for the better. Okay, let's see. Any more topics here? What's your workforce? Doing your job. I think that's really it. So I just want to thank you all again for tuning in for this live stream here, talking about this issue. I'm not looking forward to talking about really this race anymore, other than if Joe Biden makes major changes in his platform or Donald Trump does something significant, I think that's worthy of mention. I'm largely going to look to avoid talking about these movements as a whole. I think they do us an injustice by focusing on them rather than all the good change that is occurring around the country. As I said before, I don't think either of these choices are, worthy of advocacy. They're beyond the pale. A vote is different than your advocacy, though. And I think as much as you're not going to advocate for either of them, and I don't think you should, I do think it's important that you consider strategically how you vote. And if you are one of those people in a swing state, that those like 17, I believe that it's not your duty, but it is wise of you to be able to vote for Biden. And if you don't, I understand, because frankly, he hasn't earned your vote. And that's totally understandable. But in my mind, I would like to try and prevent some short-term damage if possible. So until next time, Rosebuds, I look forward to talking with you soon. We're looking to be able to do a live stream, hopefully every day of the week, and just, picking up a topic and running with it. Sometimes when we get interviews, we'll have interviews come on. And, we're going to be looking to try out a couple of different times for these live streams to see when we can get more people to come in and watch. But thank you to those that actually tuned in today to be able to hear this one. And I look forward to, having more of these. I'm looking forward to the future of the Hill of Roses. So thank you. And if you want to be joining this network, as we announced yesterday, we had 12 new joiners. I'm hoping that some of you consider that you might want to become contributors to the network as well. And if that's the case, you know how to reach out to me on Twitter at MyLifeIsMunich. You can also, comment down below in the YouTube comments, and we can try and connect separately. I always put my number out there to the public in general, 845-367-1813. So if you ever want to call me or text me and just talk about how we can build this movement up, I'm looking forward to working with you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.